Questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, since the election, a typical family's mortgage repayment has increased by $1,400 a month. Energy bills have soared, rents have increased, grocery costs are rising, real wages have not risen as promised, and in the last 2 months, over 30,000 jobs have been lost. The Prime Minister promised families will be better off under Labor, his words, but they're worse off. Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
I give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, Australians are paying the price for a decade of Liberal and National governments.
The Leader of the Opposition has asked his question.
Of a decade
Order.
of denial,
the Prime Minister will pause.
A decade.
The Prime Minister has the call.
They had no economic plan. They had 22 energy policies and didn't land one. The Leader of the Opposition raises a number of issues. On wages, he says they're not rising fast enough. But he was a part of a government that saw low wages as part of their economic architecture. It wasn't bad luck, it was bad policy. Bad policy. And then he had to hide just after, on the day that they voted against the Housing Australia Future Fund, of speaking about housing. Well, we have a plan to deal with housing. We had legislation which includes the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, that includes specific programs for veterans, specific programs for women and children escaping domestic violence, and they voted against it. And if you look at the comments of the Reserve Bank Governor, he has spoken very clearly about supply chain issues and pressures as being a major cause of inflation in this country, and yet they've indicated they're going to vote against the National Reconstruction Fund.
Order.
A program that will assist business going forward. Now, we on this side will stand up for Australian jobs and we'll stand up for Australian families, which is why we have a plan that came in on January 1 that's already making a difference for cheaper medicines. The first decrease in the price of medicines in 75 years since, once again, a former Labor government, it's only Labor governments that do the big reforms, introduced the PBS. And then we have cheaper childcare comes in on July 1. We've got fee-free TAFE, 180,000 places in areas of skills shortage, taking pressure off the cost, but also at the same time helping to fill those skills shortages and those supply chain issues. We have our energy price relief plan, where they came in here and they voted against $1.5 billion of support. $1.5 billion. The truth is that those opposite just say no to everything. They used to be the coalition, now they're just the no-alition. They just say no to absolutely everything.
Order. Give the call to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry. How will the National Reconstruction Fund support the growth of industries to help Australia move towards net zero future and to create jobs? And are there any threats to creating these new jobs?
I'll give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker. And thanks to the Labor member for Hasluck. Oh, that sounds good. Labor member for Tangney, that sounds good. Labor member for Pearce, that sounds good. Labor member for Swan. Labor member for Swan.
The Minister will return to the question.
Oh, very, very good. And you know why I mention it? Because it represents this. 10 years wasted by those opposite. 10 years where they picked fights. That was the biggest lot of work that they did, was to just pick fights, not get on with the job, not focus on the type of things that the member for Hasluck just raised about new industries, getting new things done, looking at the way in which we can create jobs, particularly in different parts of the country, particularly in our regions as well. and looking at the way to satisfy industry needs for new generation of energy, and to be able to do it in a way that cuts emissions but increases
Deputy
jobs.
Leader of the Opposition.
To be able to do that, very important. The National Reconstruction Fund, as much as it's about increasing manufacturing capability, is to be able to satisfy the need to generate new energy, create jobs, and to do it with lower emissions in the process. And the type of things, particularly the $3 billion sub-fund that was factored into our targets for reducing emissions, the $3 billion investment will support us to create the jobs that we need to deliver a clean energy future. Thinking about things like building components for wind turbines, making batteries and solar panels, investing in new types of livestock feed to reduce methane emissions, modernising the production of steel, aluminium, building hydrogen electrolysers, finding innovative packaging solutions to reduce waste. All very important investments. Jobs, jobs, jobs out of the National Reconstruction Fund. And the research tells us that 75% of new energy jobs could be created in regional Australia by 2035. Huge. The biggest threat we've got happens in the Coalition Party room, which I'm genuinely concerned is a mass hypnosis event where they bring in the RSL entertainment and the person says, when I click my fingers, you'll forget 10 years.
Order. The Minister will... The Minister...
RSL.
The Minister will pause and resume his seat for a moment. Order. Members on my right and left. The member of New England can resume his seat. I'll deal with this matter. To assist the House, it just might get you to rephrase that language, Minister. Yeah. Just order. Order to assist the House and then to continue with your answer.
So anyhow, they have the mass hypnosis event, and they click their fingers, forget 10 years.
Minister, resume your seat. I've asked you to rephrase that and withdraw for what you've said, just to assist the House to keep moving on.
Sure, but I withdraw, but they've forgotten. They have forgotten 10 years. Say no to everything. Say no to everything. And want to make sure that they just continue to say no.
Members on my left. Order. Members on my left, there is far too much noise. Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting immediately. And the House comes to order. Order. I will hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 1 month before the election, the now Prime Minister promised he would deliver on reducing cost of living pressures for Australian families because he had a plan. Because of Labor's policies, interest rates are rising higher than they otherwise would, and Australian families are paying an extra $18,000 a year on a typical mortgage. The Prime Minister is failing Australians because he doesn't have a plan. Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Order. Members on my right. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, the Governor of the Reserve Bank has made a number of appearances this week. And one of the things that he has said is that our policies are taking pressure off inflation. He's indicated that monetary policy is working hand in hand with fiscal policy. That is what he has said. And indeed, what we're seeing is the measures that we've put in place making a difference. This is what the Origin statement to the Australian Stock Exchange declared today. The announcement in December 2022 by the federal government of price caps on gas and coal is in response to global and domestic shocks.
Leader of the Nationals.
More recently, we have seen prices decline. Now, that is what Origin have said. Dr. Stephen Kennedy of the Treasury, who has served both the former government and the current government with distinction, So this following the December announcement, national electricity market future prices have declined significantly. Lower futures prices will be reflected in the default market offer announced by the regulator around the middle of the year. Over the year to June 2024, Treasury expects the coal and gas caps to reduce inflation by 0.5 point. That's what they had to say. But not everyone supports.
The Prime Minister was talking about mortgages and the cost of living and inflation pressures. Just remind the House, which was about the question, and I'll call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
A point of order on tedious repetition, Mr. Speaker.
Resume your seat immediately. Call the Leader of the House.
They're very nimble.
I'll call the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Speaker. As the questioner should know, having been here for a long time, that standing order applies to debate. If it applied to questions, none of her questions would be in order.
Order. It was a relevant point of order, but I just want to remind the House, if the Prime Minister or any other minister is addressing the House and is being directly relevant and an abuse of standing orders occurs, there will be consequences. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. But those opposite oppose every action in which we put forward to try to reduce inflationary pressure and to deal with the challenges which arise from, at a time when we have acknowledged the struggle that is going on of the people of Ukraine. The Ukrainian war, unfortunately, the actions of Russia are having an impact on global energy prices. They're feeding into inflation globally. That's just a fact. But those opposite oppose price caps. They oppose the safeguard mechanism legislation. They oppose the Housing Australia Future Fund. They oppose the National Reconstruction Fund. They oppose us increasing the wages for the lowest paid workers in Australia. What is it? What is it about the last election where they didn't get the memo? People are over conflict fatigue. People want to look for solutions and a positive agenda. And all those opposites having created the problems, they now stand in the way of all of the solutions.
Give the call to the member for Macnamara.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government ensuring our economy is prepared for the opportunities of a decarbonising world, and what are the risks of not acting?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to my honourable friend for his leadership on matters of climate and his advocacy on matters of climate. And, Mr. Speaker, Australia is on the cusp. We're on the cusp of a remarkable opportunity.
Order.
Around the world, there is a search for clean, green, cheap energy. Around the world, there is a hunger for critical minerals and rare earths. We are on this cusp of a remarkable opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and it will take policies to make this opportunity a reality. And there are three key policies to making this so. Firstly, there's the government's safeguards reforms, which are important for reducing emissions, 205 million tonnes, but they're also vital for certainty. And they're vital as the world's consumers and investors are looking for companies with real plans to net zero and real frameworks to achieve it. And this point was made by the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury in Senate estimates today, Luke Yeaman, who pointed out that this sort of framework is vital for attracting capital to Australian industry. And he also pointed out that there was a Treasurer who'd made similar points, but not the current Treasurer. The former Treasurer, the former member for Kooyong, was making this point just a few months ago, Mr. Speaker, but a few things have changed since then. The second policy which is vital is the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Now, this is an existing policy, but it's still a key policy, and it's a policy that was opposed by those opposite. The member for Bradfield predicted it would be a financial disaster. Now, the CEFC for every dollar they invest, they unleash $2.60 of private investment. And for one example, they're co-investing in new electric vehicles for mines, reducing emissions by 46,000 tonnes a year, delivering trucks and mining equipment which is more comfortable for their drivers and workers, but of course the coalition has opposed the CEFC. And the final policy is the National Reconstruction Fund, with up to $3 billion allocated for clean energy transition. We don't want to just be the country which provides the world with clean energy. We want to be the country that makes the things that provides clean energy around the world. And there's also $1 billion allocated for processing and value-adding of critical minerals. But those who oppose this don't want us to value-add to our critical minerals. They don't want us to manufacture in Australia, Mr Speaker. The three things which bring these policies together and make them connected is not only that they are key, is that the opposition's been against them in all three cases. The Leader of the Opposition's a triple threat in the worst sense of the word, Mr Speaker. He's a triple threat to the Australian economy, a triple threat to the opportunities available to us. I grant him this. His shadow ministry meetings must be pretty efficient. The government wants to create jobs? Yeah, nah. No need for a submission. Just, yeah, nah, we're not doing that. Wants a housing fund? Yeah, nah. They must have really quick meetings, Mr Speaker. They want to have a safeguards reform to actually reduce emissions and create jobs? Yeah, nah. Australia deserves better than this, Leader of the Opposition.
Concluded. And I give the call to the honourable member for Griffith.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Environment Minister. The Greens have offered to pass your government's climate legislation in full with one amendment: no new coal and gas mines. There's no ultimatum, just an offer to pass Labor's bill this afternoon if you stop opening coal and gas mines. But this morning you said on Sky TV, of course, you would approve new coal mines. Are you seriously willing to dump your whole climate plan because Labor wants to open new coal and gas mines?
Order. There's far too much noise on my right and left. I give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I really want to thank the member for his question. And I can tell you that I am so very delighted to have a question from the Greens about practical action on climate change and the environment. We are the only government that has a plan to bring down emissions in Australia, an emissions reduction target of 43% by 2030, with a clear path to net zero by 2050 enshrined in law. And I'd like to see you back that, because what happened when you lined up with the Liberals last time to block the carbon pollution reduction scheme—
Order. Members on my right, I can barely hear a word the minister is saying. She has the call.
What we saw was more emissions for longer because you voted with them. I'm proud. I'm proud of what we're doing on this side to bring down carbon pollution. It's not just the safeguard mechanism, it's the $20 billion for rewiring the nation so we can get more renewables into our electricity grid. It's the legislation I took through this parliament on reducing ozone-depleting gases. It's the methane pledge.
Order.
It's the $3 billion in the National Reconstruction Fund to—
The minister will pause. I'd like to hear— well, the minister is being directly relevant. The same rules will apply to everyone in this House if it's a frivolous point of order. So the minister is being relevant to the question. She's referring to the issues that you were raised in the question. So this point of order cannot be on relevance, but I'll hear from the member for Griffith.
Mr Speaker, I understand that reasoning, but on relevance, Mr Speaker, on relevance—
Order. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. I want to be clear with everyone. My rulings and respect for standing orders applies to everyone, no matter where you sit in this chamber. I specifically told the member for Griffith that the minister was being relevant. He has abused the standing orders and he will leave the chamber under 94A. The minister has the call. Order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd like to say to the Greens that the best thing they can do to see emissions reductions in this country is to back the safeguard mechanism. This is a legislated path that sees us reducing emissions by 43% by 2030 on a credible path to net zero. But, Mr Speaker, I would add that what I'd also like to see from the Greens political party is their support for our environmental law reform when it comes before this parliament, because those environmental laws will see faster, clearer decision-making for business and much stronger protections for our environment, because we know we have to protect our environment. We have to do better at protecting what's precious. We have to do better at repairing what's damaged, and we have to do better at managing our natural environment for the future. So back us on the safeguard mechanism, back us on the National Reconstruction Fund, back us on housing affordability, and back us on our environmental law reform.
Order. Give the call to the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. How will the National Reconstruction Fund create jobs in the minerals sector, and are there any threats to these jobs?
Order. Give the call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for Swan for her excellent question. The importance of value adding to resources is something she's well aware of. Of course, the nickel industry her father worked for in Kambalda has been transformed by the world's demand for batteries, as well as all our other critical minerals to go into those batteries. Mr Speaker, we are delivering as a government action on climate change, and we are building industries that will create good Australian jobs. The $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund will support jobs in critical minerals industries by securing the capital investment to allow those industries to grow and their workforces to grow, and for industry as a whole to prosper. The government's $1 billion Value Adding and Resources Fund, part of that $15 billion NRF, in case those opposite had not been aware of that, it is targeted squarely at the development of the critical minerals industry. The Value Added in Resources Fund will bring jobs to our regions, bring manufacturing capability and processing back to our country, and ensure our national security by ensuring critical mineral supply chains for Australia's benefit and indeed for all of those in this region. Labor understands that Australians want us to be a country that makes more onshore, and that means backing the industries and the businesses that are making things here and supporting manufacturing in regional Australia and also out of metropolitan Australia. We stand at the crossroads of an immense opportunity in relation to the global clean energy economy. The world needs our resources industry and our critical minerals to decarbonise, just as our domestic energy system will need lithium, vanadium, nickel and copper products for our own energy transition. Just as the iron ore revolution of the 60s and the LNG industry grew in the recent decades, Australia's prosperity, our jobs of the future, will rely on decisions taken now to support the development of our critical minerals industry. On the few occasions the Abbott Turnbull Morrison government had some good ideas to boost Australian jobs, such as the critical minerals facility, Labor supported that in the national interest. When they announced a $1.25 billion loan to the rare earth facility in Eneabba, we supported that in the national interest and the interest of growing the critical minerals industry. But now, Mr Speaker, we have an opposition that doesn't support its old decisions. It used to support the critical minerals industry. Now it comes in to opposition. It decides it wants nothing to do with the development of critical minerals, and they demonstrate that by not supporting the Value Added in Resources Fund. Those opposite just demonstrate that they think they have a monopoly on good ideas. Well, that is absolutely wrong. We support the critical minerals industry in this country, and the Value Added Resources Fund is a critical part of that.
Has concluded. Order. The House. Members on my right will cease interjecting immediately. And I give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In the job figures today, we see the dangerous combination of stubbornly high inflation and job losses. Labor's only answer is to spend more money when history tells us this is exactly the wrong approach. Why does Labor always get the big economic calls wrong?
Give the call. Order. It's a very broad question. And give the call to the Prime Minister.
It is very broad, Mr Speaker. Question for every day. Every day the Treasurer sits there and he expects to get a question, and it just never happens, Mr Speaker. But maybe when we get back, that will happen. I live in hope. Well, of course, there was an increase in the unemployment rate today to 3.7%, up from 3.5%. I do note that that is still lower than the unemployment rate that we inherited when we came to office. I do note also that there were more jobs created on our watch in our first 6 months than any government in history. Any government in history. If you go back to any new government, no government has presided over the creation of more jobs than we did. And I'm asked as well.
Order.
I'm asked as well about debt from the mob that left us $1 trillion of debt. $1 trillion of debt. With
order. The member for Hume.
With nothing to show for it. And
order.
then you have our programs. Our programs, like the National Reconstruction Fund, which is supported by industry, which is supported by workers, which will be a great example of new industry policy, creating new industries, particularly in the regions, allowing us to deal with the constraints that are there in supply chains, but those opposite are opposing it. And then you have the safeguard mechanism, where, once again, they're just opposing it. Well, this is what the Chief Executive of AI Group Manufacturers said today, Innes Willox. A form of political extremism is at play here. It has cost us before and it could cost us again. That is what the Australian Industry Group have had to say. Andrew McKellar, the head of ACCI, again, not an affiliate.
Order.
This is not the time for another climate war. Once again, being negative. For the sake of certainty and the achievement of our emissions reduction goals, the safeguard mechanism must pass Parliament. Past failure to deal with this reality has crimped certainty for industry and investors and left our energy sector in disarray. I wonder who the Energy Minister was. Australian businesses and households are now paying the price.
Order.
Indeed they are.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Treasurer. How does the Albanese Labor government's economic plan help address some of the factors putting pressure on inflation?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the wonderful member for Macquarie for her question. I haven't got a question from the Shadow Treasurer since November, so it's nice to get one from really anywhere I can get it. Mr Speaker,
order.
Mr Speaker, we've got a lot going for us in our country and in our economy. We're getting good prices for our exports. We're seeing the welcome beginnings of wages growth in our economy, and unemployment's got a 3 in front of it, and that's important. New numbers out today, unemployment with a 3 in front of it. But I think, as we all know, or certainly on this side of the House we understand, is that inflation is the biggest threat to our economy because it's putting pressure on families and pensioners and small businesses in every community and every corner of this country. And we know from the Reserve Bank Governor that at least half and as much as 3/4 of the inflation in our economy actually comes from supply-side pressures in our supply chains and in our workforces. And much of that has global origins, of course, and it's beyond our control, but some of it stems from a decade-long failure to deal with these growing challenges. And Australians are now paying a really hefty price for the economic mismanagement that this country has endured for the best part of a decade. So it's no coincidence, Mr Speaker, that a key feature of our economic plan is about repairing these broken supply chains. It's a direct and deliberate response to the problems that were left to gather and grow larger over that wasted decade that we've been through. Now, this side of the House, Mr Speaker, in response to these economic challenges, we said we'd deliver a national reconstruction fund to create more opportunities and to fix our supply chains and make them more resilient, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We said we'd tackle our housing affordability and supply problems with the Housing Australia Future Fund, and we're doing that as well. We said we'd invest in cleaner and cheaper and more reliable energy, and we're doing that too. We said we would clean up the mess that they left us, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, before the parliament, Mr Speaker, there are a number of bills which go right to the core of the economic plan that all the objective observers in this country think is the right way to come at this inflation challenge in our economy. And those opposite, true to form, are voting against them. So when they vote no to the National Reconstruction Fund or the Housing Australia Future Fund or cleaner and cheaper energy, they are voting for broken supply chains, for fewer affordable homes, for even higher energy bills. And in saying no to all these things, they are saying yes to higher inflation for even longer, when inflation is punishing our families and pensioners and small businesses. Mr Speaker, I think Australians understand who is working hard on their behalf to address the inflation challenge in our economy, and they know for sure who is hell-bent on keeping inflation higher for longer with this ridiculous pig-headed approach to the legislation before the House.
Give the call to the member for Flinders.
My question is to the Prime Minister. According to KPMG analysis, hundreds of thousands of Australians will face a $16,500 increase in mortgage repayments this year, following 8 consecutive interest rate rises on the government's watch. Where are the cheaper mortgages the Prime Minister promised to deliver, and why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm asked about our shared equity scheme that we announced during the election campaign.
Order.
And I've got I do say that the New South Wales Premier had this to say when they, of course, announced their own shared equity scheme. Thousands register for shared equity home buyer helper ahead of launch. Said this, I understand the federal Liberal Party opposed Prime Minister Albanese's scheme, but I think it makes sense.
Member for Deakin.
He was then asked if they could change their tune, if they could come to their senses, and he said this, they'll see the light, I think it makes sense. Turn the light on.
Order. Members on my left, when the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. Why is the Albanese Labor government prioritising its landmark housing reform package?
The member for Parramatta will resume his seat. I cannot hear the question. I remind members that is not the time to interject when the question is being asked or before an answer begins. Give the call to the member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. Why is the Albanese Labor government prioritising its landmark housing reform package, and what are the consequences of delay?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Parramatta for his question.
The member for Deakin will cease interjecting immediately.
That those on this side of the House understand how critical it is for us to deliver more social and affordable housing. And indeed, it was great to be in his electorate last November, where we actually jointly announced more than 300 affordable rental properties that the federal government is contributing to at Westmead, where we talked to the key worker, a midwife, about how great that rental property was for her and how important it will be for her to be able to continue her job. Indeed, with the passage of our landmark legislation through this House, we have taken a big step forward to start addressing the nation's housing crisis. The legislation will create the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. This is the single biggest injection by a federal government in more than a decade in social and affordable housing. And of course, as part of that package is our National Affordability and Supply Council, where we will be getting advice for all tiers of government from the Council about how to improve housing supply and make it more affordable. And of course, the creation of Housing Australia. That will be the home of our housing agenda. The $10 billion fund, as I said, is the single biggest investment in social and affordable housing in more than a decade. But we on this side of the House make no apologies for trying to get this done as quickly as we can. We understand that people on the ground, the people that write to me every day, and I'm sure to many members over there, talking about just how tough it is to be able to afford to rent a home, are writing every day. They understand how critical this is and we need to get on with it. And I'd say to those opposite, stop saying no, to go back to your electorates after this parliamentary break, talk to people about social and affordable housing and come back here and tell your colleagues in the Senate to vote yes for this legislation. Get out of our way so that we can get on and deliver on our election commitment to help those Australians who are doing it tough, to help those Australians who need this social and affordable housing, to help the women and children who are fleeing family violence, to help build more homes for veterans, and importantly to improving Indigenous remote housing. I mean, that is part of the legislation and part of what we're trying to do with this Housing Australia Future Fund. I cannot believe that members on the other side continue to say no to this. I want to thank all of those members who actually voted yes. The crossbench all voted yes, the member for Bass voted yes, of course all on this side voted yes, but those on the other side continue to say no, and all this will do is delay this critical funding and getting homes on the ground. We need to ensure we get more homes on the ground more quickly for those Australians that need it.
Order. Give the call to the member for Macpherson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The last time Labor dismantled the Coalition's strong border protection policies, over 800 boats arrived and, tragically, 1,200 people died at sea. Now it's been revealed that the Australian Navy has had to divert resources to provide a surge of extra patrols in anticipation of an increase in illegal boat arrivals. Doesn't this prove that Labor's policy to end the deterrent of temporary protection visas provides an incentive to people smugglers to restart their evil trade?
Order. The member for Macnamara will cease interjecting. Call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question. The government is fully committed to Operation Sovereign Borders. We've made that very clear. And
the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting, as will members of my left. Otherwise, they will not be in the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call. Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And this government will be tough on borders without being weak on humanity. And that's the position that we took to the election, and that's the position that we're implementing. It might seem obscure to those opposite the idea of a government implementing the policies that they took to an election, but that is precisely what we are doing. And when Mr Pizzullo, the Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, was asked about whether the department advised against the changes to TPVs as announced today, he announced as crisply as he could, in one word, no. No. But the member, they're familiar with the word no. It's their favourite word. I don't know why they missed it.
Order.
I don't know why they missed it. Mr Pizzullo also said that Operation Sovereign Borders relies upon three crucial pillars. He went through an offshore disruption pillar, where you operate against the people smugglers and you seek to disrupt ventures before they take to sea, an on-water component that involves interception after detection of arriving vessels and their treatment, and then a regional processing element that ultimately sees third country resettlement. Those are the three pillars, and he went on to say that that is precisely what the government is implementing. That's right. But I'm asked by the member opposite about potential for boats attempting to get here, I seem to remember millions of Australians getting a text message,
Disgrace.
on election day, not when we were the government, when they were the government, getting a text message. It's true that perhaps the minister wasn't the one who authorised it. Perhaps the other Minister for Home Affairs was the one who authorised it. One of the most disgraceful manipulations that we have seen in Australian politics on your watch.
Order. Members on my right. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The member for Moreton is warned. Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Today, the Attorney-General released the Privacy Act review that was promised but never delivered by the previous government. What are its key findings and what are the next steps for privacy reform?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the honourable member for Pearce for her question. The large-scale data breaches of 2022 were distressing for millions of Australians, with sensitive personal information being exposed to the risk of identity fraud and scams. Following those breaches, the government acted very swiftly to significantly increase penalties under the Privacy Act for serious or repeated privacy breaches and gave the Australian Information Commissioner improved and new powers. But we made clear at the time that more was needed to protect Australians' privacy. The Australian people rightly expect greater protections, transparency and control over their personal information. Today I released the long-awaited review of the Privacy Act by my department. This review was commissioned by those opposite way back in 2019, but they never finished it. This is just another example of the Labor government cleaning up the mess left by the Liberals and the Nationals. The comprehensive review that my department has completed now has found that the Privacy Act is no longer fit for purpose and does not adequately protect Australians' privacy in the digital age. The department's report makes 116 recommendations for change, and the government wants to know what Australians think about those suggested changes. I encourage all Australians interested in the protection of their privacy to make a submission to help guide our decision-making. I hope that the review sparks a conversation about the need for change and how that change is to be made. We're not afraid of robust debate. In fact, I welcome it. Our government listens when Australians tell us that there's a problem, and unlike those opposite, we'll act to fix it.
Call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Arts. Trove, the National Library of Australia's online platform, provides one of the world's largest digital archives of local history, but its funding is set to expire in June. This news is causing concern among historians, family researchers and students. Will the government commit to funding Trove beyond June, and will you commit to keeping its status free for all Australians?
Give a call to the Minister for the Arts and the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Mayo for the question, and the member for Mayo is among many members who've been raising this issue with me. Obviously, I'm not in a position to announce decisions that are going through the budget process at the moment. But in terms of Trove, allow me to say this. First of all, Trove is something that when we were last in government, we were very committed to with the funding, and that funding was stripped away when we lost office. Check with George. George Brandis cut it. What then happened was when the previous government recommenced funding to Trove, the funding was time limited, and that's why we're confronting an expiry date of the 30th of June this year. For those people who aren't familiar with Trove, effectively this is how what is available in our collecting institutions becomes available to the whole of Australia. So a whole lot of people, whether it's searching family history or whether it's academics, are able to get access to what's in our collections, even if it's not on display. and are able to find out a good deal, not just of Australia's story, but often of their own personal story in the background of their own areas. So the government is very much aware of the significance of Trove. You'll not find us showing a lack of commitment to it, if I could put it in those terms, but decisions on exact funding profiles are being made in the current budget process, and I'm certainly looking forward to being able to provide more to the House as those decisions progress.
I give the call to the honourable member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. How is the Albanese government tackling foreign interference activities in Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security.
Speaker, could I thank the member for Adelaide for this really important question? Speaker, it's no secret that we face enormously difficult geopolitical challenges, in fact the most difficult that our country has faced since the Second World War. And how we as a parliament manage those challenges will define the Australia that my children enjoy as adults. Our ability to manage and shape our nation's future will depend on how free and fair our democracy is and how much Australians trust and engage with it. The stronger our democracy, the more choices we have about what our future looks like. And the member for Adelaide asked me about what is probably the biggest challenge to Australia's democracy today, and that is the threat of foreign interference. Countries can quite legitimately influence what happens in other nations in perfectly legitimate ways. The Australian government does it through embassies, through the diplomatic corps, through our engagement with multilateral institutions. What we will not tolerate is attempts to engage in our politics or interfere in our communities in ways that are coercive, corrupting, deceptive or clandestine. We will not tolerate attempts by foreign powers to harass, watch and coerce Australian citizens. Foreign interference is real, it is relentless and it is happening in all of our communities every day, and our government is stepping up efforts to fight it. Earlier this week, I spoke publicly for the first time about how one country, Iran, is attempting to influence Australian democracy in deceptive ways and trying to harass, watch and control the activities of Iranian Australians. Earlier this week, I held a roundtable with other ministers and community leaders to talk about how we can work together on these problems. ASIO is very focused on these issues. I shared on Monday some detail about a plot that was foiled recently by our security agencies, where an Iranian-Australian family were put under surveillance by the Iranian government in their own home in our country. And my message to regimes seeking to interfere with Australia and Australians is don't. We are watching you and we will catch you. To tackle this problem, some things are going to need to change. I've asked my agencies to develop an attribution framework. I think it's really important for us as a parliament to be able to point out this issue and call out the perpetrators where appropriate. We need a public debate which is commensurate with the size of this problem, and we are nowhere near that today, and that's something that I'm trying to change. When I talk to communities who are potentially at threat of this problem, the clear message I get back from them is that they need our help, they need more information, and that's why my agencies are going to undertake widespread community outreach this year. Speaker, I really hope we'll have bipartisan support for these initiatives. I'm getting a little bit of back chat here and I'm not quite sure why that would be the case, because these are serious national problems that we are only going to be able to confront and only going to be able to tackle if we work together across the aisle as one country.
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister and I refer to his previous answer. If the Prime Minister is happy to claim credit for increases in employment since the election, why is he not prepared to take responsibility for the 8 consecutive increases in interest rates on his watch?
I give the call to the Prime Minister. The order. The Prime Minister has the call and will be heard in silence.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, they are very predictable each and every day. Each and every day it's question 1 from the Leader of the Opposition, question 2 from the Deputy Leader. We then go to the crossbenchers.
Order.
Then we have question 3.
Order.
Then we have question 3 from the Shadow Treasurer, not to the Treasurer but to me. Then we go to the back and then they think about what they'll do. Well, I say to the member for Bradfield, congratulations on giving yourself the MPI. You know, you can imagine.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, on relevance, Australian families are hurting, and this Prime Minister is arrogant.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. That is not a point of order. It was not stated, but I'm going to keep going. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly it is a fact that inflation causes pain to people, and interest rates when they're 3.35% compared with where they were are placing pressure on families, just as on the Leader of the Opposition's watch they were 6.75 compared with 3.35. But
Order.
for those opposite who actually come into this chamber, decide their tactics, the manager of opposition business who asked this question is in charge of the tactics in this place.
Order.
And they come in and they vote against every piece of legislation that would make a difference to people.
Order.
That would make a difference. They vote against assistance with
on my left, the member for Hume,
with our housing
the member for
package.
Groom.
They vote against the National Reconstruction Fund. They vote against energy price relief. They vote against industrial relations changes which are aimed at lifting wages. They vote against every initiative that's put forward. But there is some hope, I say to colleagues here. There is some hope because the Leader of the Opposition has, of course, not done an MPI since he took that high office, not once. But this afternoon,
Order,
don't be alarmed if the oxygen masks drop from above. It's just because the member for Bradfield is speaking.
Order. Members on my left. The House will come to order. So I can hear from the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Government Services. What have we learnt from the Royal Commission into Robodebt about concerns raised by those representing the Robodebt victims?
Give the call to the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Macon for his question. Over the last 2 weeks, I've updated the House about Royal Commission evidence how various groups in the community warn the government about the unlawful Robodebt scheme, the whistleblowers, the lawyers, the media, the brave victims. There's another group that the Royal Commission's heard evidence from, the welfare advocates. These people were underfunded. They tirelessly, continually warned about Robodebt on behalf of our most vulnerable. Specifically, the Royal Commission has heard from respected welfare advocates Genevieve Bolton, Catherine Boyle and Catherine Eagle. Importantly, they reminded the Royal Commission that Australia is a signatory to the United Nations International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, specifically Article 9. Article 9 is that social security is a right for people to access. Or in other words, it's not an optional charity to be taken by whim from the government. These advocates further gave evidence that they repeatedly told the former coalition government they had concerns with the averaging process, the automatic application of a 10% interest fee, the unreliability of the automated process. The victims had to chase information from employers who were no longer in business. The victims were told at Centrelink that they first would have to borrow money from payday lenders or use their credit cards in order to pay unlawful debts. That there were victims who were fleeing domestic violence, who were homeless. The first time they knew that they had a Centrelink debt, a Robodebt debt, was when the debt collectors found them. The victims were told that in a significant departure from previous practice before the coalition government, that they had the onus.
Order. The Minister will resume his seat. Order. Members on my right. Members on my right. The Attorney-General will cease interjecting. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, you have ruled on this repeatedly. The Minister is a repeat offender. The principle is clear that he ought not to be drawing conclusions about the conduct of individuals who are parties to the proceedings. He risks compromising the Royal Commission by doing this. Yep. And once again, he's doing exactly what he—
Resume your seat. On numerous order, the Manager of Opposition Business is correct. On numerous occasions, I've reminded the Minister I want him to answer the question with respect to the evidence and not put any conjecture onto any findings or any outcomes. And if he does so, I will ask him to resume his seat. And I call the Minister for Government Services.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to say for the record that whilst the truth was uncomfortable for those listening to it, it was more uncomfortable for the Robodebt victims, and everything I'm saying is evidence. These are facts, and no amount of interjections from the member for Bradfield changes the truth.
The Minister will continue with his answer.
Pardon?
The Minister will continue with his answer.
Thank you. Of the spread of clients, the evidence shows that the advocates put forward that of the spread of clients—
Resume your seat. The Minister can continue with his answer.
Thank you. The evidence shows from the advocates that of the spread of clients—
The order. The Minister for Skills will cease interjecting. This is a serious issue for the Parliament. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, the principle is very clear. The Royal Commission is charged with reaching conclusions as to fact. That is exactly what is in the terms of reference. The Minister is repeatedly trampling
Resume your seat. The Minister was 8 seconds in, and he was, in his opening remarks, talking about evidence, and I'm going to listen carefully to make sure he is referring to the evidence, and if he doesn't, he will have one last time and he will be resuming his seat. Order! The Minister has the call.
For the benefit for the member of Bradfield, read from page 996 of the evidence. That's what I'm quoting from. Of the spread of clients who were contacted by these advocates, 37% of the Robodebt victims these advocates represent had a disability.
The Manager will cease interjecting.
19% were homeless. 12% were victims of domestic violence or in danger of it. In summary, the advocates said, we consistently raised our concerns about Robodebt, which we believe to be unlawful. It consistently fell on deaf ears. And I also wish to advise the House that as of 2 o'clock today, the government's announced at the request of the Royal Commission an extension to its reporting dates to the 30th of June this year.
Give the call to the member for Warringah.
To the Prime Minister. In 2021 at Terrigal, you said, a Labor government that I lead will stop PEP 11 dead in its tracks. In this place, you said PEP 11 has gone through Labor caucus and been unanimously rejected, and you voted in support of debate on my bill. Any joint authority decision risks being challenged for apprehended bias and so take years to be resolved. The New South Wales Coalition have agreed to legislate. My bill is again on the notice paper to give our community certainty. Will you list it for debate and support and kill off PEP 11?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
The member asks a question which invites an answer that is in breach of the law that has been determined in a court case of which is why we are in this circumstance in the first place. The Minister for Resources will make a decision according to the law.
Order. Give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. What action is the Albanese government taking to respond to the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Werriwa for her important question and for her advocacy on a continued basis that I've engaged with her on behalf of her 1,500 veterans in her community, as do all members of this place advocate on behalf of their veterans, and that is a very good thing. The Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, which was supported by this government, handed down its interim report in August of last year. And I'm proud that in September I was able to present the government's formal response to that interim report, a sign of a good, competent government getting on with the job that is required of it by the Australian public, getting on with the job of implementing those recommendations. We responded to those 13 recommendations. We have taken steps in respect of all 13 of those recommendations. And today I was able to advance our work in respect of recommendation 1 to harmonise and simplify veterans' entitlements legislation, because, as the Royal Commission pointed out, the complexity of the legislation that veterans have to deal with, the delays that veterans have had to deal with because of the complexity of that legislation, has been a contributor to the suicidality of our veterans. And that is a national tragedy that we have had to confront. And that's why today I announced our pathway for consultation, the Veterans Legislation Reform Consultation Pathway, setting out a way forward for us to improve the circumstances for our veterans, looking at an alternative way, closing out the two older schemes that have been in existence for now well over 100 years, over a century, and moving forward for new claims to be dealt with under the remaining 21st century scheme. What we've announced today is a proposal for consultation. We want to work closely with those who are affected the most, our veterans, their families, our defence personnel, as well as engaging with health professionals, veterans advocates and the many other people engaged in our veteran support system. So we'll be taking this pathway out for consultation, listening to people and their views, making sure that we get this right on behalf of our veterans. And I very much look forward, as well as engaging in those direct consultations around the country with organisations, with individuals, to engaging with the opposition, with the crossbench parties, with the independents, to make sure that we can all deliver a better future for our veterans and families. Because if we don't, there will be lives that will continue to be lost.
I give the call to the member for Flynn.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Regional health services in my electorate are under enormous pressure. Can the Prime Minister explain to communities of central Queensland why Labor has broken its key election promise to have an urgent care clinic up and running within 12 months?
I give the member for McEwen. Give the call to the Minister. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy. And I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Need to check my calendar for 2022, Mr Speaker, but pretty sure the election was in May. Pretty sure the election was in May. We're very proud of the policy we took to the election to deliver 50 urgent care services over the course of this year. And can I say to the member and to all people in the House who have an interest in making it easier to see a doctor and cheaper to see a doctor, that there has been absolutely terrific buy-in from every single state and territory government, Liberal and Labor alike. And for the last few months, we've been engaged very closely with them on the locations of the services that would be in their jurisdiction, on protocols between the urgent care service and the local hospitals, on protocols between the urgent care service and local ambulance services, and on making sure that the scope of practice that will be delivered by the urgent care service is appropriate to restrict it to those non-life-threatening emergencies. This is a really important reform in Australia. We know, many members of this House will know, that primary care services have been trying to get up an urgent care service model in Australia for years. And the truth is that the Medicare system alone doesn't support it, which is why we took a model to the last election that would combine a mix of MBS servicing with block funding to underpin the staff that would be necessary for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. offering, fully bulk billed, taking walk-in patients, working closely with acute services in the region. Now, I'd like to think that those opposite would get behind a model that would make it easier to see a doctor after being responsible for 10 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare that have put Medicare in its worst shape in a 40-year history. And I think the member should talk to his leader, who bears more responsibility than any single person in this country for the condition of general practice after trying to foist a GP tax on every single Australian, pensioner, concession card holder, child, and when that couldn't get through the Senate, instead freezing the Medicare rebate for 6 long years, a practice continued by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition when she was the Minister for Health as well. So I'm happy to take questions about the fact that we were the only party who went to the last election promising more investment in Medicare, promising to strengthen a model we have such pride in as the creator of that great universal healthcare system, and promising 50 urgent care clinics around the country.
As the minister concluded his answer, the member for McEwen has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is the Minister for Education. What changes is the Albanese government making to NAPLAN to lift standards and provide better information for parents and teachers?
The call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for McEwen for his question? Every year in May, students right across the country in Year 3, Year 5, Year 7 and Year 9 sit the NAPLAN tests. They sit tests in reading and writing and spelling, in grammar, punctuation and in maths. And last Friday, Education ministers met and agreed to the biggest changes in NAPLAN since it was established 14 years ago. The changes mean that the test will now be in March rather than in May, that the tests will be all online, and we're also lifting the minimum standards that students are going to be expected to meet. Moving the test forward from May to March is important because teachers and parents tell us it means they get information on how students and their children are progressing earlier in the school year. It still takes too long, though, once the test is done, for teachers and parents to get that information. It can take months. And so one of the things we need to work on over the next few years is getting that information to parents and to teachers as quick as possible. I said we're lifting the standards that students are going to be expected to meet, and we are. At the moment, about 7% of students don't meet the minimum standard for NAPLAN. The changes we're making mean we expect that this year about 10% of students won't meet that level. We're also making it simpler. Instead of 10 categories, there'll now be 4. And the 4th category, where students don't meet the minimum standard, will now be called needs additional support. And we've done that for a reason, and that's because parents have asked us to call it that, in particular Indigenous parents and Indigenous teachers, to make it clear that they're below the minimum standard and that more support is needed, to zero in on this and make sure that we can make a difference. Can I thank them for their input? Can I thank the education ministers across the country, Labor, Liberal and National? It's a good example of what we can do when we work together. The next thing we've got to do is make sure that we're providing that additional support. There's always going to be children that fall behind. What matters is what we do to make sure that they don't stay behind or fall further behind, to help them catch up. As I said to the House last week, if you're a child from a poor background or from the regions or an Indigenous child, you're 3 times more likely to be in that group. So what we do here matters. The funding's important, but so is what it's spent on, what it's invested in. And so as we begin the work this year on developing the next National Schools Reform Agreement, what's important is that we tie funding to the sorts of things that are going to help these children who are falling behind, so that the children who need the support the most to catch up get that support.
Give the call to the member for Fairfax. Order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the minister guarantee that no businesses will close and no jobs will be lost as a result of Labor's changes to the safeguard mechanism?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. Members on my right. The Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question and welcome him back to Australia, Mr Speaker, after his highly successful tour of nuclear success stories, Mr Speaker, that he conducted just last week. Now, Mr Speaker, I'll tell you what I will guarantee. I guarantee you that the safeguard mechanism reforms that we are putting in place will put Australian industries in the best possible position to make the most of the decarbonisation that's occurring around the world, Mr Speaker. I guarantee this, Mr Speaker. The reforms that we put in place, for which I've always given due credit to the member for Hume, like I do, as a post-partisan figure, Mr Speaker, always give due credit to the member for Hume for the safeguard credits, which he said will provide business with the opportunity for the lowest cost abatement. I guarantee that it will provide that basis for the lowest cost abatement, Mr Speaker. That's what I guarantee. I guarantee that the support at the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group and the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry reflects the views of industry, that finally, after 10 years of denial and delay, we have a government with one energy policy, one climate change policy, which we are implementing.
For a moment. Resume your seat. Order. I'll hear from the... I couldn't hear a lot, but I'll hear from the member for Fairfax.
Mr Speaker, he did not answer the question.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The minister's concluded his answer. Order. The member for Fairfax will cease interjecting immediately. If he interjects one more time, he won't be here. Give a call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the delivery of the Albanese Labor government's fee-free TAFE and VET plan working to relieve cost of living pressures and repair supply chains?
Give a call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, thank you, Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member for Corangamite for her very good question and the fact that she's been a strong advocate for skills. Had a wonderful roundtable in her electorate talking to local businesses about how we can supply skills locally. Can I say, Speaker, having inherited a massive skills shortage, we promised to respond accordingly. It's why we convened the Jobs and Skills Summit. It's why we announced the 180,000 fee-free TAFE and VET places for 2023. It's why we've established the Jobs and Skills Australia. It's, of course, why we struck 8 agreements with state and territory governments. Now, Speaker, many people in this place, certainly on this side, fully understand the transformative power of education and training. We understand it as individuals, and we understand the impact on the nation if we can invest in skills wisely. And, of course, that's what we look to do. And it's more important now, Speaker, than ever before. 9 out of every 10 jobs created in our economy require a university degree, which, of course, Minister Clare would fully understand, or a VET qualification. That's what we know. It's essential, of course, therefore, we remove barriers to education and training. And one of the barriers to education and training, Mr Speaker, is cost. That's why we invested in 180,000 fee-free TAFE and VET places to provide access to areas of skills that are in demand. The other reason, of course, we needed to invest in skills is because if we invest in skills that are in demand, we have a more productive and more efficient workforce. That's the facts, reality, and that's why it's so baffling that those opposite oppose this plan. If we are to rewire the nation and fulfil the Powering Australian plan, then we need to ensure that we invest in skills. If we're going to get the absolute maximum out of the National Reconstruction Fund, then we need to invest in skills. If we're going to look after older Australians, if we're going to teach preschool kids, we have to invest in skills, and that's what we've chosen to do, Mr Speaker. We need to do that because we need to be a better economy if we invest in manufacturing. We're going to deal with the supply chain problems that the minister asked about. These things matter. That's why our plans are being supported by ACCI, by AI Group, by Business Council of Australia, by the ACTU, by many, many others. And it really begs the question, Speaker, why do those opposite oppose a plan that is good for workers, that is good for businesses, that is good for consumers and is critical for this nation's future?
Give a call to the member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Has the minister received any advice from his department about the likely impact on energy prices of the forthcoming closure of the Liddell Power Station, and also any information about this government's delays in delivering the Kurri Kurri gas plant?
Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
When was that decision made?
Order. Order. The House will come to order.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I have received advice on the closure of the Liddell Power Station, which was announced when I think Malcolm Turnbull was the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr Speaker. I have received advice on the pressures in our energy system as a result of 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy leaving our grid over the last decade and only 1 gigawatt of dispatchable energy coming on, Mr Speaker. I have received advice about that and the pressure it applies. And the honourable member asked me about delays in Kurri Kurri and Snowy 2.0, well, related to Snowy 2.0, 2 separate projects being managed by Snowy Hydro, both of which are running late, Mr Speaker, both of which are running late as a result of mismanagement by the previous government. I have received advice on those matters. I'm happy to confirm it for the honourable member.
The order. I give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In 2022, the government passed legislation for cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare and energy price relief to take pressure off families. What is the government doing this year to strengthen our economy, and is there any opposition to these plans?
Give the order. Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Surely not. Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, I thank the member for Reid for her question, and indeed when we were elected we did hit the ground running. We are a government with a sense of purpose, and that's because after a wasted decade of delay and denial and inaction, Australians wanted solutions, and that is what we are delivering. I'm asked about what we're doing this year with legislation to make a difference, and of course there's 3 pieces of legislation that are before this parliament. The Housing Australia Future Fund, affordable housing, housing for veterans, housing for women escaping domestic and family violence, housing for frontline workers, the National Reconstruction Fund, supporting Australian manufacturing, secure jobs, dealing with the supply chain challenges, and the Safeguards mechanism, providing business with certainty, ending the climate wars, which is why it's supported by the business community across the board. Across the board, all of those policies are supported by the sectors. Those opposite come here and ask about the challenges that we're facing. Well, they say no to every solution. Having presided over the creation of the problems, they say no to the solutions. No to affordable housing, no to housing for veterans, no to housing for women and children escaping domestic violence, no to secure jobs, no to manufacturing, no to industries in our regions, no to energy price relief, no to ending the climate wars. They don't have amendments, they don't have ideas, they just say no. Now, at a time when Australians want us to come together and offer real solutions, those opposite offer nothing but cynical, negative politics. Making Tony Abbott look positive is what they are doing. Now, we're investing in making things here in Australia, in value-adding. Those opposite are determined to add no value at all, either in industry or in this chamber. We're investing to make sure that Australians have a roof over their heads. Those opposite are determined to slam the door on them. We're investing in ending the climate wars and moving Australia forward, giving business the certainty that it needs. Those opposite are stuck in the past and they want us to all go back there and join them. The leader in the Senate of the opposition has a different view, though. He said this week: I think it's in Australia's interest for us to try to have greater policy certainty in the long run there. He argued for the Safeguards mechanism in their team. He says this: we need to be making sure that we as a country, leading in terms of our work around emissions reduction, that we as a parliament are trying to provide greater certainty for Australian business for the long run. He had that to say after the election, and on that note,
time
I
is
ask
concluded.
that further questions be placed on the notice paper.